It was erased for space, but I would remind you on this board we did the line of the counterfeit. So we traced the counterfeit from 2001, 2013, 2001, 2005, 2013, 2019, Panium. Comparing and contrasting that with the reform line of the priests. So restoration of modern Israel, restoration of modern Babylon. And we've erased that for space. Over that, we'd laid the Third Diadochi War. And why did we do that? Why did we go to the Third Diadochi War? Brother Rogers. To show that the papacy has a role to play in the Sunday law history. Anyone else? Sister Dorcas. To show the work that the papacy is going to do and how the line counterfeits. To show the rise of the papacy at the end of the world. So the Third Diadochi War, it introduces the papacy at what way mark? Time of the end, 1989. A relationship between John Paul II and Reagan. And what happens to that relationship? It's destroyed. How quickly? Straight away. And then you can trace that relationship completely destroyed all the way from the history of 1990, 91, all the way through to what way mark? When do they interact next? So the relationship has been destroyed. Then what, when it comes to Seleucus?
So they meet at Panium.
They meet at Panium? What begins to happen at Panium, my sister? Show us what the Third Diadochi War teaches us about the papacy. I missed the last half of what you said, sorry. So it says a war between the King of the North, the United States, and the papacy, Antigonus and Seleucus, and how in that Babylonian war, Seleucus carves out his empire. And it begins at Panium and it ends at the Sunday law. Now, 2 years ago when we saw a war, how would we have applied that? How would we have applied war 2 years ago? Fighting. So we would have seen a literal physical battle in Daniel 11, and when we made application, we would have seen we went from literal war, literal battle. That's what we've done now. What did we do before? 2 years ago, what were we doing? We were looking ahead to Raphia, and to understand Raphia, we looked to Raphia in Daniel 11. We saw a literal hot war battle between the king of the north and the king of the south at Raphia. And so how did we apply that? Literal hot war battle. And what have we had to learn? A war in our time, but the model changed. You said? So you're talking about application now. So what was the mistake of what we did before? So we're taking a literal history and making literal application. So we're going from literal to literal. And now we know better than that, yes? So when we look at the Babylonian War, what do we expect? Is there going to be a war between Francis and Trump?
Yeah, I think so, because the line is fixed.
So we can call it a war?
The model will change in information.
Sister Jennifer. Hot war between Seleucus and Antigonus. Make application. What do you think it'll look like?
Since you're not in a time of war,
Sorry, I missed the last part.
I think it will be an information war.
An information war? So you're not expecting physical fighting? Yes? Physical fighting? No. You're not going to have hot war between Trump and Francis. So I just want to make sure in our minds that we're not tempted to go literal. We need to think about what that war symbolizes, what it looks like. So we've drawn up there the history of the counterfeit, the resurrection from 2001, 2005, arrival of the second angel, death of leadership, 2013, transfer from Benedict to Francis, first angel to second angel, and then we traced 2014 to 19. Our dispensation is the restructuring of the Catholic Church. So I want to just do some revision of what we did yesterday. Perhaps drawing it a little bit more simply. Pretty much taking this concept and putting it over each other. If we were to take the reform line of the priests, and we say 1989, if we were to try and 9/11, 2014, 2019, 2021. 1989 is the time of the end, and we begin the work of ploughing. And who's raised up at the time of the end? Jeff? FFA? And who is opposing them? Who are the two sides? Versus Adventist structure. So at the time of the end, these are the two sides in opposition. 1989 to 9/11, there's going to be an increase of knowledge. 1991, 1996, it's going to be formalised with a publication. Does that make sense? What is said in the Time of the End magazine regarding the King of the South? What happened to it? It's dead. When did we see that happen? So the Time of the End magazine, it's explaining what two events? (1989), fall of the Berlin Wall. 1991, dissolution of the Soviet Union. Does that make sense? So this publication is to explain the time of the end and the increase of knowledge. Is that okay? We come to 9/11. Again, there's going to be an increase of knowledge. Formalisation test. 2014, what happens? My sister. 2014, internally, what happens? Transition of leadership from Elder Jeff to Elder Parminder. So there's a transition of leadership in 2014. 2014, there's going to be another increase of knowledge. (2016), 2018. 2018, those messages are presented from Fatima through to the counterfeit. That whole encapsulated set of messages begins to be presented in September and finishes in early October. Does that make sense? We talk about October 3, October 13, but they began to be presented in September, beginning with the message of Fatima. September and October of 2018. And then we found, first of all, this history is Jeff, FFA versus Adventist structure. What's the theme of our reform line that we spoke of yesterday from Daniel 2? Sister Fiona. I can't hear you, sorry. What's the theme of our reform line? This is the reform line of the priests. Go back to Daniel chapter 2. What is God doing through these reform lines? In Daniel chapter 2, you have two structures, yes? Don't speak to her. In Daniel chapter 2, you have two structures, a mountain and a statue. In these reform lines, in this reform line, is God dealing with the mountain or the statue? The mountain. So what is God doing through this reform line? What happens to that mountain? What happens to the statue? It's cut. What cuts it? Sorry? In the story, what cuts it? So we know the statue gets smashed, broken. What breaks down the statue? If you don't understand the question, you can tell me. So in Daniel chapter 2, you have a mountain and you have a statue. By the end of the story, do you have a mountain or a statue? This mountain? No. So by the end of the story, do you have this mountain and this statue? The statue is gone. What about the mountain? It's gone. So both of these are going to be gone by the end of our story. So what happens to the statue? You said it's obliterated, it's smashed. What smashes it? The stone. And where does the stone come from? The mountain. So this mountain, what does it represent? It's the church of God. Be specific. But the 144,000 exist at the end of our reform line. This mountain doesn't. So the mountain is the movement. Then what's the stone? The stone is the movement. So what's the mountain? The church. The Adventist church structure. So if this is the Adventist church structure, the movement is cut out of that. When does God begin to cut the movement out? The time of the end. So 1989, this stone begins to be cut out of this mountain. So when we talk about a reform line, and it has the 5 fingers, 5 key waymarks, that's the story of God reaching in, and He's going to pull out that stone. Does that make sense? Going to gather His people, but He's going to reach into the church and pull out a people. That makes sense. So we know that this reform line is all about God cutting the stone out of the mountain or cutting out a group of people from the Adventist church structure. Does that make sense? So I just want to make that clear. That is the theme of our reform line. It is to be cut out of Adventism. I'll say of the Adventist structure. So that's okay. So as we look at how that happened, how God did that, we see at the very beginning He starts to cut out this movement. He starts to raise up Elder Jeff and his ministry, and they're going to butt heads or come into direct conflict with the Adventist leaders. So you're going to see at the very beginning that separation occur. 9/11, what happens to the Adventist leadership? Saul, what do we say happens? Destroyed, killed. And then we come down to this history. This is our midnight cry. We come down to our midnight cry. And do we see this movement versus Adventism? No, that's not what we see. We don't see this movement versus Adventism. Where is Adventism? It's gone. I know that this gets more complicated because we have priests and Levites. When we go to the world, there's no 2 groups, so I want to discount that added piece of information. Adventism is gone. They don't hear the message of equality. Equality has not divided us from the church from 14 to 19. Where was the division? Within the movement, it was this movement versus Jeff and FFA. And when I say movement, I want to say new leadership, plus the movement. So you have Elder Jeff, Future for America versus this Adventist church structure, and this is the theme of our whole reform line. But under the midnight cry, what message is being given? We have the message of come out. From 14 to 19, most of the people in this movement came out of Adventism and joined this movement. But where was the real shaking? The division we saw, our opposition, those who fought us the hardest, our greatest threat, was not Adventism, it's Elder Jeff and Future for America, those who did the ploughing. Does that all make sense? So all that we're doing is we're taking this structure and we're applying it down here. I know there's a dynamic of priests and Levites. I don't want to think about that right now. So it's not necessary for our story. This is the church. This is the world. When we come to 2014 to 2019, we're dealing with the ploughing of the world. 2014 becomes their time of the end. And who's raised up? We'll say Michael Moore. He becomes the symbol of a movement. We'll use Michael Moore, but I also want to put under him this movement. And it's him versus who? Steve Bannon. I want to say it's the United States structure. Why do I want to say that? Where do we see Adventism in the United States compared and contrasted? Acts 27. So this is us being cut out of Adventism. This is the world being cut out of Trump's America. It's more than Steve Bannon. It becomes complicated because Donald Trump is his own type of movement, but it becomes Trump's America, the United States structure, which we see replicated in other countries. But if we go to Acts 27, it allows you to compare and contrast the Adventist structure with the United States structure. So we come down here to the world, and this is the story of a group of people being cut out. In the story of Daniel, 2 more beaten out, and what are they cut out of? They're cut out of Trump's conservative America. Does that make sense? You can put Steve Bannon in there, if you like. So they're going to have an increase of knowledge, 2016, and it's going to be formalised in 2018. And we compare and contrast this history of their ploughing with the history of our ploughing, and also our own dispensation of 14 to 19. Does that make sense? So Michael Moore, he releases his documentary in September through October. So the Midnight Cry was presented through late September, early October. Michael Moore releases Fahrenheit 11/9. Late September, early October, same time frame. And this documentary, what is it designed to explain? (2014). Why does it go to 2014? Sister Jackie. Why does Michael Moore go back to 2014? What happened here? Sorry? That's in 2004. So So we'd have to do our 10 years to get that. 2014, something happens in his hometown.
Water crisis.
The water crisis. Poisoning the water in Flint, Michigan. So he's going to go back to 2014, explain the time of the end. 2016, the election of Donald Trump. He's going to tie them all together into his message. Does that make sense? So just as the internal explained the time of the end and the increase of knowledge, so his formalization explains the time of the end and the increase of knowledge. 2019 to 2021. What happens in 2021? The Sunday law waymark, the middle waymark. What must happen? My sister. What must happen here? Change of leadership. So who's the first leader? Michael Moore? AOC? They're leading a movement. 2021, who becomes the new leadership? This movement. How can you prove that? What makes you think we're the new leadership here? It's going to join sides with the papacy? But how do you know the new leadership is us? We have the right message for them? When do we give that? This is Panium. This is their Sunday law. Over here we have the Sunday law of the 144,000. Then we have the close of probation for the 144,000. So here we start to give them a message, and what are we saying to them? Come out. So this is where we need to take this history, our latter rain history, but what happens in our latter rain happens in their harvest. Does that make sense? We understand the difference between the lines of the Levites and Nethinims compared to the line of the 144,000 priests. So there will be Sunday law, a Boston, a Concord, and Exeter. And when we get to the loud cry, we're telling people to come out. So we need to take the history of our latter rain, but for them, because of the difference with their reform line, it becomes the history of their harvest. And we're the ones telling them to come out. If we're the ones telling them where to go and what to do, we're their new leadership. Yes? My sister said that those who were the first angel who did the ploughing work, they're going to join sides with Francis. We all okay with that? When do they join sides with Francis? When are they going to join his side? Yes.
They are going to join the side at Pania. But when they started doing this at that time,
At their time of the end?
that's when they started it, but fully they are going to be doing at Pania.
Why do you say they started back here?
Because if you are going to trace it, that switch off and that means that you should have something from the time of the they should move all through the reform.
I like his answer. It was what I was looking for. They're going to join Francis properly in the future. We can see that on the reform lines. From Panium as the papacy rises. But he wants to use the methodology of linking the reform lines. So they're already with Francis here, aren't they? How do you know that? Sister Solange. Because they're liberals? What's peculiar about Michael Moore and AOC? We lined them up with Sean Hannity and Steve Bannon. 4 people, 2 of them lead the Liberal side, 2 of them at the Conservative. Both of them lead a movement. What do all 4 have in common? Sister Solange. They're all Catholic. So Michael Moore and AOC, they're both Catholic. So September, October 2018 lines up with our September, October 2018. It's the formalisation of our midnight cry. It's the formalisation of their ploughing history. And what does Michael Moore do in October that he's never done before? Sister Snyder. He goes to the Vatican and meets with Pope Francis. And they have a nice little chat right here. How does that go? What does Pope Francis say to Michael Moore? I was going to work from the start, go forward, but that's the point. Pope Francis says to Michael Moore, pray for me. Michael Moore says, do you believe in capitalism? Francis says, nope. He says, do you believe that the wealthy abusing the poor is a sin? Francis says, yes. So they have this little discussion about their ideology and what is it about Pope Francis and Michael Moore's ideology? The same thing. They agreed on every point. And then Pope Francis says to Michael Moore, pray for me. And Michael Moore says to Pope Francis, no, you pray for me. And Pope Francis says to Michael Moore, no, but keep making videos. He's encouraging Michael Moore to keep, and Francis knows what this is about. He's encouraging Michael Moore to continue production. So you know right back here that they have the exact same ideology and they're supportive of one another. Does that make sense? It's not a coincidence that the same month as the formalisation of that message is the first time Michael Moore has ever met with a pope. At least Pope Francis. I don't think he ever met Benedict. Sister Snyder would. So from the very beginning you have an interaction between this new movement and Pope Francis. Then you come down to 2021. Next year, what happens to that leadership? It's bypassed. So Michael Moore, AOC, by the end of next year, where are they? On the wrong side, they're in the ranks of the opposition. 18 months' time, around that. 2014, did everyone know there's a new leadership of the movement? How many people knew that? No one. No one knew it. Did that stop it being true? Does any of the world know in 2021 that they're Nethinims and there's a movement who's their boss? No. No one knows that. Does that make any difference? Does it? Brother Willie? No, it doesn't. Maybe you mistook my question. Did it make any difference in 2014? God has identified a new leadership. The people just were slow to catch up. So the Nethinims might be slow to catch up, but this movement leads them from Panium. We're all okay with that? Okay with that. So I forgot that I'd erased the board work. I'd wanted to just step through the counterfeit again and pick up a couple of points. The 2 points I wanted to pick up was Benedict, how he is in the Laodicean condition. All of those compare and contrasts. Go over this study for yourself. Draw notes for yourself so you don't lose the point. What are they arguing over? Dispensationalism. All of those points where what is within the movement is so accurately counterfeited. We're arguing over dispensationalism in inspiration. They're arguing about dispensationalism in tradition. But we have the same points. Benedict is in a Laodicean condition. He's holding on to the old traditions. What does the name Francis mean? Why did he choose the name Francis? Because of Francis of Assisi. What was the job function of Francis of Assisi? What was he told by God to do, according to their legend? To build a church. Does someone want to add more to that? Is the church already there? Rebuild it. So if we were to look at this structure, the one we're in now, what's its problem? What's the problem? Why do we have tent roofs? It's not complete. In some respects, it's broken down. So it wasn't that they were to build a new church. It was that the church they had, Catholic Church, was in a state of decay, was broken down. And Francis of Assisi was told, rebuild my church. We know him because he loved animals, didn't he? That's the whole legend. So he believed in social welfare, didn't he? He's going to take care of all the poor and the suffering, all those animals. He has this caring nature, the care for the poor. It's the entire, he chose the name Francis because of anyone they're going to choose. It's Francis of Assisi who looks like liberation theology. That's why he chose the name. But it also comes with this directive to rebuild a struggling church. So the Catholic Church is in disrepair. It's broken down because of the infighting, the sexual abuse crisis, financial mismanagement. And what does Francis plan to do? Resurrect the Catholic Church. So for the first time in 600 years, you have two popes living at the same time. For the first time in 1,000 years, a millennium, you have a pope who has chosen to have no number after his name. He will not be Francis I, which he should be. So you have first in 600 years, first in 1,000 years, to make this structure of the counterfeit fit prophecy. So we said that when we come to this history of come out, the theme of this reform line is a stone or this movement being cut out of Adventism. Come down to here and what you see is an internal split and shaking between first and second angel. I just want to make the point though, Elder Jeff is the first angel. Does he still carry that title? No. So I use that parabolically. But Moses died here. John the Baptist died here. He no longer carries that symbology. But that's what you have, the first leader versus the second leader. Two sets of disciples, a split movement. So when we come to this history, the theme is cut out of Trump's conservative America. That's the theme of the whole line. But when we get to this history of come out, it'll be an internal split inside the movement of the Nethinims between the new leadership, which equals this movement, and who? Francis, who will be aided by Michael Moore, quite likely, AOC, and those associating with them. Does that make sense? So Francis, when he chose the name Francis, there had never been a pope in history who'd chosen that name. So by tradition, he should be known as Francis I, just like Benedict is Benedict the 16th. They should always have a number over their name. Francis deliberately chose not to do that. He said, I won't have a number after my name. I won't be the Francis I, it'll only be Francis. You haven't had a pope make that decision in 1,000 years. It's 1,000 years going back to where you have a pope who doesn't have a number. because there is no Francis II, yes?
And then the one for 600 years, because you make people in the one for 1,000 and the one for 600.
It's been 600 years since you've had two living popes existing at the same time. We go back into the reform line of Christ, and you don't have two leaders living at the same time. John knew that he must die for Christ to begin his ministry. We read that quote. First leader dies, second leader takes over. Solves a lot of complications. Now we have a problem where we have a first leader living at this time of the second leader. So all those who don't like the second leader, what can they do? Go back to the first leader. It's the internal condition, so it must be the condition of the counterfeit. We have a living Elder Jeff and a living Elder Parminder, so there must be a living Benedict and a living Francis. I just wanted to highlight that we haven't had that in 600 years. These things are given to us to explain the internal. So it starts to change our dynamic of this Sunday law to close of probation history. So if we were to come back to this board, what we've done is essentially this. We know that from 14 to 19, we lined up these two sides between the Steve Bannon and the Michael Moore. We spoke about Francis in this history, Michael Moore in this history, Steve Bannon in this history. So we've gone through quite a few different layers. I just want to add one thing on top of this that's a little bit separate to that study, but still becomes relevant. When we look at the dispensation of 14 to 19, we haven't done this here. I did plan on it, but we have gone into this subject more thoroughly than I anticipated, which I'm glad for, but it meant I didn't do this. But what did we discuss in Kenya, for those of you that were there, when we looked about 2014 to 2019? We went through subject after subject, and you could bookend it. You could mark it the beginning and the end as lining up with the beginning and the end of this dispensation, for those of you that have seen that. We did that with Donald Trump. What does Donald Trump need to take over first to be a dictator? His own government. He needs to take over the Republican Party. You see that begin here. Before he's even president, what's the name of the Republican purged here, the first one to get purged? Eric Cantor, 2019, how much party loyalty? 100%. So you know that this is the beginning and the end of a purging process. There was another subject we tackled. What else does Donald Trump need? What does he need to do to bring in a Sunday law, whatever that law looks like? What does he need to have control of? The judicial system. That begins when? What happens in 2014 before he's ever president? Brother Rogers? So Mitch McConnell, can't write MM, look like Michael Moore. Mitch McConnell starts blocking Obama appointing any judges. So from 14 to 19, you have first Obama can't appoint any judges, and then Donald Trump starts flooding the judiciary with conservative judges. To in 2019, you have a situation where there are so many conservative judges, they're saying, you know, if Bernie Sanders wins the 2020 election, what difference does that make? Not actually that much difference. You might have a liberal president, but when the whole court system, the whole judiciary system is conservative, the Supreme Court is conservative, all those different circuits are conservative, You have all those court cases come up regarding civil rights, human rights, equal rights. And when that system is led by conservative judges, what they're saying in a panicked fashion in the news media is that whoever wins, Trump has left the United States in such a condition it won't recover for a generation. Not in your and my lifetime. Maybe if we got really old. But he's changed the judiciary system in such a way that it cannot be reversed, at least in the next 40 years. Does that make sense? So that's the takeover of the judiciary system from 14 to 19, and you can bookend it. Want to bring that to the counterfeit. What does Pope Francis have to do first? Take over the Catholic Church, and what's the best way to do that? What's the best way to make sure? Sister Emma. Purge. So what does he need to bring in? Liberal priests? The lower levels matter, but what's the ultimate that he has to change to make sure if he dies tomorrow, his legacy is irreversible, at least in the next generation? Trump needs to impact the judiciary system. What does Pope Francis need to impact? I want to read from a newspaper article. This is the New York Times. See if I can fit it here. It's the New York Times. It's written October 4, 2019. And it says, Pope Francis may not change the world. But he is reshaping the Catholic Church. Pope Francis may not change the world, but he is reshaping the Catholic Church. They're saying how externally you have this rise of populism, and that is, in a way, holding him back. But it says inside the Catholic Church is a different story. In a ceremony at St. Peter's Basilica on Saturday, Francis will create 13 new cardinals who reflect his pastoral style and priorities on a range of issues including migration, climate change, the inclusion of gay Catholics, interreligious dialogue, and shifting church power away from Rome to bishops in Africa, Asia, and South America. The appointments are a landmark for Francis, who now reaches a tipping point of influence to shape the future church in his image. After Saturday, Francis will have named more than half of the voters within the College of Cardinals. I want to suggest here what Donald Trump needs to do is change the judiciary branch after his own image. What Pope Francis needs to change is the College of Cardinals. What's the job function of the College of Cardinals? One of them. Pope Francis dies, who picks the next pope? The College of Cardinals. The longer it lasts, the more there will be cardinals in the spirit of Pope Francis, said Archbishop Jean-Claude Hollerich of Luxembourg, who will be one of those made a cardinal this weekend. Francis has by now made his agenda abundantly clear. Francis wants an inclusive church that welcomes back into the fold Catholics who feel geographically, pastorally, and ideologically alienated. This is an article from 2017, National Catholic Reporter. If it's a National Catholic Reporter, is it likely to be for Pope Francis or against Pope Francis? People said for. for. Who said it's against? Who said it's against? Sister Elizabeth, National Catholic Reporter, is it for or against? It's for. I have to double check that now, because now I'm not sure I was. What's the one that's against him? National Catholic Register. So you know that this one is to be for him. So this is quite a positive worded article, but the title does not paint him in the best light. It's called Francis Stacks the College of Cardinals. Do we know what it means to stack something, like to stack the Supreme Court? So if there's, how many people are on the Supreme Court? 9. It's meant to be 4 Conservatives, 4 Liberal and 1 someone middle of the road. So there's 9 on the Supreme Court. Roosevelt wanted to stack the Supreme Court. What did he want to do? He was going to add people to that Supreme Court. So let's say the Supreme Court is 6 Liberals and 3 Conservatives. They all are members of the Supreme Court for as long as they live. You can resign if you want, but otherwise it's a position for life. So if Donald Trump wants to turn that Conservative, he can't fire anyone, can't legally kill anyone. So what's the only way he would be able to turn that Conservative? If you have 6 Liberals, 3 Conservatives. What presidents have tried to do is add positions. So what the other Roosevelt, Franklin D. Roosevelt tried to do is, this isn't the literal situation, but if there's 6 Liberals and 3 Conservatives, he's going to say, we don't have a 9-member Supreme Court, we have a 15-member Supreme Court. And then he's going to add 6 Conservatives. Can you see how he just switched it, swayed the Supreme Court from Liberal to Conservative? You're going to pump it with your allies. So this is an article from 2017, and I won't read it all, but it just talks about how Pope Francis has made revolutionary changes to the College of Cardinals. He's changed the system so that a pope can stack the college with bishops who support his views. Says this change will have an impact on the church for hundreds of years, if we were to go on that long. One of the most common changes made by the popes has been increasing the number of colleges in the College of Cardinals. It goes on to explain how Francis has manipulated this and to give some history of where this has happened before. But to give some idea, Pope Francis has created cardinals every year since 2014. So in 2014, he I don't know what they call it, he elects his first cardinal. By 2019, what has he done? He's switched the College of Cardinals from independent or conservative to liberal. So he swayed the College of Cardinals, just as Donald Trump from 14 to 19 switched the judiciary system. You can bookend it. This is just Wikipedia, the Wikipedia article titled Cardinals Created by Francis. It has its own Wikipedia page. John Paul II appointed how many cardinals? 19. Pope Benedict appointed 42. Pope Francis, in 7 years, has appointed 67. John Paul, in all of his years from 1978 to 2005, those decades, he only appointed 19 cardinals. Pope Benedict 42, Pope Francis has already brought in 67 and counting. So can you see how he's changed the Catholic Church in a way that the next, even if they were to get a conservative pope in, he's going to have problems. They've both set up the system. I just wanted to highlight that bookend while we were still speaking about Francis and what he's done in this dispensation. We discussed REPAM, we discussed the Synod on the family, but it's also how he's restructured the Catholic Church. From 14, mostly conservative, to the first cardinal he appoints in 14 to 19, when they're already noting that he's reshaped the church in a way that is irreversible in the next, at least in the next generation. So we come back to our study. I want us to think about the impacts of what we're saying now about what this looks like. When we talk about this history of calling people out, and we all said at the beginning that the division would be between conservatives and liberals. And the purpose of our studies that we've done for the last 3 weeks is to question this. That the split that we see, as much as this is people being cut out of Trump's America, this split is between the leadership, this movement, versus our greatest threat. Our greatest threat is not Donald Trump and conservative America. Our greatest threat is Michael Moore, AOC, lining up with Francis, the counterfeit. That becomes the division. The reason that we need to challenge this, when we said it'll be conservative versus liberals, is because what we see this division to be is what starts to impact what message we think we're giving them. Does that make sense? People are, I don't think they're realizing that, but they're building their idea about what this history looks like and what we do for these people based on the two groups that they think are forming. Does that make sense? So I have this thought, I'm not sure how to word it. When we talk about the first angel, go back to Moses. Moses is raised up at the time of the end. Does he have a correct understanding of the nature of Christ's kingdom? No. What's his problem? With his message. And he goes and kills the Egyptian. He has a problem. He's half and half. Come down to John the Baptist. What's John the Baptist's problem? Does he understand the nature of the kingdom? Come down to William Miller. What's his problem? Now, our two most accurate histories to compare and contrast is Christ and 144,000. History of success, history of success. So we come down to Elder Jeff, and what is the problem? What he's attacking this movement for is what he would say is lightly regarding the messages he gave in the ploughing time. And we say we understand they were important, just like the messages of John the Baptist were important. But John did not understand the nature of Christ's kingdom, and Elder Jeff does not understand the nature of Christ's kingdom. Does that make sense? It's a consistent problem with the first angel. So if this is the modelling, what's the problem with Michael Moore and AOC? They must be half right and half wrong. When you come down to the history of the second angel, go to the history of success. Second angel becomes who? Christ. Christ represents this movement, yes? I want to say Christ represents the second angel of this movement. Does that make sense? Because he doesn't represent Elder Jeff. We're all okay with that. John doesn't understand the nature of Christ's kingdom. He's half right and he's half wrong. Does Christ understand the nature of the kingdom? Yes. He's 100% correct. So when we compare and contrast this history, we have the ploughing of the world and we have the latter reign of this movement of the priests. All of this occurs. This is the beginning of the work of Christ and this is the crucifixion. Is that okay? And Christ represents this movement, the faithful of this movement. He represents the second angel. So does the second angel and the giver of the midnight cry understand the nature of the kingdom? Yes. Are they 100% correct on that subject? Yes. So the problem that I have with how people are now thinking, I'm going to word what they're thinking and they might say they don't agree with this, but I believe that's what are saying in their conclusions, even if they don't like the way it's worded. They're saying, look at us, this movement of wicked conservatives. We need to go to the world, to Michael Moore, to understand the nature of Christ's kingdom. Because we didn't understand about equality, and they had it already figured out. So now, we're down here. We're here, after the cross, and people are still saying, they're posting on Facebook, music videos of pop singers, links to secular movies, because they're saying, look, this pop singer understands equality. We should learn from them. Look at the great good AOC is doing. And then they're building this model where they think they're going to come down to this harvest period, and this is why they think we're going to give them no other requirement except a political message. Because what else do they need? They have it all figured out. Do we understand? That's their train of thought. Even if they don't understand that's their train of thought, that's their train of thought. Look at those good people, Michael Moore, AOC, they get it, we don't get it. We need to learn from them. And then when we learn from them, some down in this history will join forces because they have it all figured out. We just need to get the same political message as them, and then we're all going to come into harmony. First thing we needed to do is break down that idea of harmony. They are not our friends when we get to the harvest period. They are our mortal enemies in the harvest period. We need to separate those two. Then we need to think about the other impacts of that. Michael Moore and AOC, they're half right and they're half wrong. They don't understand the nature of this kingdom. Do we understand the nature of the kingdom? Yes. Do the second angel and the giver of the midnight cry understand the nature of the kingdom? Yes. So we understand the nature of the kingdom. Do they? So what do they have to teach us? Nothing. We're going to a group of people that are half right and half wrong. And the people that are saying this, that we give them nothing else because they have it figured out. It's us conservatives that are needing to sort ourselves out. I would ask them the question, where are they half wrong? Where are they half wrong? Where are they half wrong? Because you know that if Elder Jeff was half wrong and John the Baptist, neither of them knew what that kingdom looked like. You know that these two, they don't know what this kingdom looks like. They haven't got this figured out. There's major errors through their message. What's wrong with their message? If we don't know, do you think it's safe to be following them compared to the priesthood God raised up 30 years ago? No, I would suggest that's dangerous. It's foolishness to go to them to lead us. when we don't even can clearly identify where they're half wrong. But you know that they can't be the ones to teach us, because if they taught us and we don't know what's wrong, what are we just going to imbibe? The half wrong of those who plough the world. The point of bringing a people out from 1989 to 2014 is to actually prepare a people who don't have something half wrong, who know how to lead this movement. This movement is not capable of leading itself come the end of next year. And first of all, when we look to them, the world, their movies, their movie stars, their pop stars, all of these different things, as if they're going to teach us, not only are those people not even on this level, how much are they actually caring about equality? I'll use an example. Beyonce. We all know who Beyonce is. You picture her, you all know what she looks like. You all know what her husband looks like. You line up Beyonce and her husband. Which one's, let's be fair, which one's attractive, more attractive? Beyonce. She's known to be just like the ultimate ideal of what a woman should look like. You compare and contrast her with her husband. What does she live for? Why does she do all that? Her body, her makeup, everything about her, that image, why does she do that? Does he have to do that to be famous and popular? He can walk out in a sweatshirt, no makeup on. Why do people follow and like her? It's because of what she looks like, isn't it? People don't follow her because of her brain, because of her organizational skills, because she's a good leader. People don't even follow her that much because of her voice. People follow her because of what she looks like. Line up AOC and Michael Moore. If AOC looked like Michael Moore, do you think people would care what she said? No. Does Michael Moore have to concentrate on what he looks like to get people's attention? People don't care. Do you think if she looked that way, people would give her the attention they do? So how much do they understand equality? This is the problem when we start talking about adornment. Why are we doing that? If it's to follow someone like AOC, I would suggest that the equality that we're trying to learn from them is not even a very good equality. This movement understands equality when we say, we don't care what you look like. It's nice to be presentable. We don't care about that bodily perfection. We care about your voice and your mind and your spirituality, don't we? That's the message of equality. It's a counterfeit equality when we start thinking that they have that all figured out. They got equality before we did. Those liberals don't understand equality. Because to listen to a woman, even as liberals, they still want her to look like Beyonce. And then we want to listen to her music videos because in her music videos she speaks about equality. And I'm saying she doesn't know what equality is. Does that make sense? Do we have any thoughts or questions so far? My brother.
Okay, you have said about when you share about what the articles or their speeches, but it comes sometimes that you have reference, like what we are drawing some reference what they did. Now, what is the limitation of us doing that one? Doing a reference.
We made the point yesterday. Why can't we go to the world now? Why can't we go to the world now? We know the ugly reason, which is we also don't get equality. That's been evidenced every day. We don't get equality, so we can't go to the world. We're not in unity. We're not fit for duty. That's our ugly reason. What's the other reason we can't go to the world right now?
The message that we give them to harm them.
The message would harm them. How would it harm them?
Because if they know that mislead them, then they will not happen.
So they're still in the history when Michael Moore and AOC, that first angel is leading them. Do they need to trust him? If we had have gone into the history of 1996 and said, by the way, Elder Jeff is going to be your worst enemy, there's heaps of things he hasn't figured out yet, would people have trusted him as they needed to? No, people needed to trust. If this was the ministry of John and we had have gone to the disciples and said, be careful with this fellow, he's teaching you error, he's teaching you about a kingdom that isn't coming, would they have followed John as they needed to? They wouldn't have. So when we come down to this history, one of the reasons we can't go to the world is those that are doing their ploughing, that are doing that work they actually need to trust in. And we have the ability of prophetic sight. So we can see prophetically that they become the enemy. If we were to tell them that now, we'd damage them. They cannot yet have our prophetic foresight as to what's going to happen. That needs to wait for God's timing. So they need to trust, particularly in this history, they need to have implicit trust in these people, in that movement. So you know that to some extent they're trustworthy. We know that they're doing a good job. What the problem is one of the reasons we got to this place in the first place is you talk about the wickedness of conservatives and people fling into the other ditch and think we're all these liberals. I want to use an example for that. We did this message, dispensationalism, from Eden to Eden. What did this teach us? What was the purpose of doing this? My brother? Restoration. When it comes to gender, equality. A woman can equal an elder. And on that point alone, how many conservatives do we lose? And then everyone says, oh, we're liberals now. Then you do another line of progression and you say, Eden, we were vegan. So what are we going to be down here? Vegan. How many liberals does that make happy? That's a conservative position, by the way. So are we conservatives or liberals? Conservatives here, liberals here. There's a problem with using these titles. I get why people are saying they're liberals. But we need to be careful on our definitions of what liberalism is. Because liberalism is not freedom in the way it can be framed. The same line that taught us women are equal taught us we should all be good vegans, health reformers. That's not a position that liberals in the church hold to. So are we conservative or liberal? The reason I bring that up is where I think we become endangered is when we think that down in the history of Christ, we're half right and half wrong, and somehow in their ploughing they have it all figured out. Because that type of mentality alone is twisting people's idea of what is right and wrong, and of what message we bring to people and how we lead them, what we require of them. Because if they have it all figured out, all that we need to do is have a political message here that brings the two movements into unity and meshes them into one. But we know that can't be the case. Do we have any thoughts or questions on that subject so far? Sister Snyder. the message we were given here, if we had have been studying properly, and I had a discussion yesterday, there's lots of men all over the world who think that it's a woman's job to cook, and men shouldn't have to cook, that's women's work. And they speak degradingly of it, or they think degradingly of it, like it's women's work in some type of beneath them caste system. Ellen White says, first of all, we should never ever look down or speak down against a woman's work. Second of all, she says all men should cook. So one of the reasons we have issues in our dispensation is because we haven't even followed the equality of the last dispensation. If we don't even have the equality Ellen White introduced, how hard is it for people to get the equality of this dispensation? But there is enough in Ellen White's writings for us to know that men should cook, if we were reading properly. There is enough in this message. If we were studying inspiration fully, we don't need the world. We could look to what they're doing because it makes it easier. This is the cheat version. So we could look to them as some type of cheat version and come to that conclusion much more quickly. It makes sense. But the non-cheat version is we have it all within our message in a pure, unadulterated form, correct equality. And what I'm trying to highlight is, first of all, this is the cheat version. We already had it in this message. Not only that, but it's flawed. They don't fully get it, I don't believe. If they fully got it, you wouldn't have someone like AOC who gets attention and Michael Moore. Because if you swapped what they look like, it would look very different. Just like if you swap Steve Bannon and one of the ladies of Fox News. There's a picture, every one of them has to be blonde. There's a pattern that they have to fill. The same way you don't get Beyonce and her husband if you switch them. They don't understand equality. They get it to a point, to a level, enough to get through the ploughing. But we know from our own history that this message, the message that ploughs them is half wrong. They don't understand the nature of the kingdom. So we need to know what they have wrong. And we need to not be taking their error into this movement like somehow that's meant to lead or teach us. So in answer to your question, I would say we have it in its pure form. The only cases where we don't have it in its pure form is for the exact same reason some men don't want to cook or wash their own dishes or wash their own clothes, because they don't follow the instructions of the prophet from the last dispensation, not because she didn't lay all that out in front of us. As a movement, we understand it. Any other questions or thoughts? Brother Robert.
Just ask myself some questions.
Some questions, plural. You might need to write them down for tomorrow.
So, what is Michael and AOC? What do they have right and have wrong for?
That's what I'm asking you. I want all those people who said that we bring them no other requirement but coming into unity on a political message, I want them to tell me where they're half wrong. I don't want to tell them that. I want other people I want them to think about it and then to tell us. Because again, first of all, they have to acknowledge that they are half wrong. And then half wrong about what? We'll take one more question and then we might close for... There's 4 hands up. I think we're about out of time. I'll take one more and then maybe if we close and... So we'll come back to this tomorrow. That's my brother.
Okay, we are seeing the issue, the first thing in the message is about the nature of what they are propagating. Now, if you have to put Michael Moore, as we are still there, the casting, they are the one who are doing that plowing. So are they wrong in the nature of the world they want to how the world wants to look they want this world to look maybe in their mind maybe a peaceful where there's harmony, equal, everything. So they are wrong in that in the issues that they are propagating. So can we say that is how they are half wrong?
But in that same views, they're also half right. So you need to be able to separate those two. I might close there and everyone can think about that before tomorrow's class. If you kneel with me, we'll close in prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for our blessings. Lord, we do not want to be lifted up inside. We know that we have a long way to go to fully implement the requirements you made for us. We know, Lord, that many will not do this and fall away. But Father, we know the high calling. We know that we are created to serve the world. What this leadership looks like, Lord, as selfless service for them. We don't mean to ridicule them, Lord, but in love for them we see that there are major errors. Even as they go through their ploughing time, as you bring them out, there are things that you wish them to leave behind. I pray, Lord, we'll understand more clearly so that we can right ourselves, that we can be protected from danger, and that we can do all that we must to help them, to bring them into your kingdom. Lord, I pray that you prepare your people. We know that you have, in your kindness, given us this time to wrestle with these things and understand these things. I pray, Lord, that we are not slow to understand, but you give us this clarity. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.